So ladies, gentlemen, fellow Kryptonians out there, now that Superman has wrapped filming, I thought it'd be fun to do a bit of a retrospective over the main things that we've learned so far during the filming, as well as covering and just revisiting other intriguing topics that have come to light during production, as in, what is it that we have to play with here with regards to what we've learned about Superman so far, now that it's all over. So we're going to revisit some discussion that we've had with some new ideas that I would love for you to all get involved in down in the comments below. So just overall, a bit of a comprehensive breakdown on the biggest details to mark where we're at right now that the movie is going into post-production. So first of all, what is the movie about? Well, we need to talk about the basic premise, the plot. I know a lot of you know this, but let's just go through it to see what we have to work with here. So James Gunn said in January of 2023, which is crazy how long ago that feels now, but short at the same time. He said that this is really the start of the DCU. It's not an origin story. It focuses on Superman balancing his Kryptonian heritage with his human upbringing. He's the embodiment of truth, justice, and the American way, and he's kindness in a world that thinks of kindness as old-fashioned. Now, the wording, as we know, kindness in a world that views kindness as old-fashioned, is really key to what we know about the plot through what's been revealed through filming at the same time. I mean, we all know as well that there's a few comic book influences on Gunn's Superman movie, such as All-Star Superman, then of course there's Superman for All Seasons, and then there's, Kingdom Come. So to cut to the chase here with what we know about the plot, with this first live action movie in the DCU, we're already jumping into a cinematic universe in where heroes exist and have existed for a long time. That is probably one of the most important things if you're a newcomer here that you need to understand about this universe. It's not like origin story day one. This is a universe in where heroes have already been doing their thing, villains, metahumans, you name it, for as long as the citizens of Earth can really remember. And so this Superman, as a result, has been flying around at least for a couple of years doing his thing. And we can see this from various newspapers on set, him saving people. Granted, we don't know exactly how long he's been Superman, but the point is he's still a Superman who's still becoming, all while not an origin and all while not a veteran and seasoned Superman. But with the world already being exposed to superheroes and villains and their antics for a long time, this paves out a certain, what I would say, status quo in where some heroes are actually not so independent in the ways that Superman and Batman are in the DCU. And I can pretty much safely assume that with Batman because I don't imagine him wearing a corporate uniform, if you know what I mean. And if you don't know what I mean, well, we're going to get into that. So, we know that the Superman movie is taking inspiration from some of the comics by having the Green Lantern, Guy Gardner, Mr. Terrific, and Hawkgirl be a part of a team in the DCU. And you may be like, well, that's not unusual. Aren't there heroic team-ups in DC's history? Well, yes, of course there is. But the way we're seeing it here in the DCU is a little bit different to maybe what you're used to. So with the casting of Sean Gunn as Maxwell Lord, we know that from filming that he has his own company known as LordTech. And these aforementioned heroes are going to be a part of a superhero team that is funded by his company. And we can see that they each wear uniforms with the LordTech logo on the center of their suits. And so they are essentially, on the bottom line, a corporate-sponsored superhero team. They are not wearing their typical Hawkgirl individual unique costume, a Guy Gardner Green Lantern costume that you're familiar with in the comics. Granted that Mr. Terrific has his very accurate suit look, and it's possible that he works at LordTech and made these other uniformed costumes for Hawkgirl and Guy Gardner, but you get my point. For the most part, this is a uniform suit, and we know that it is literally a part of the LordTech Maxwell Lord company. So the influences that we're working here with how this pertains to the plot of Superman and how this paints a picture of what it's like to be a superhero in the present day DCU is that the influences are from, I guess you could say, some teams in the comics that are known as the Conglomerate, of which were definitely a corporate corporate-sponsored team and formed by none other than Maxwell Lord's ex-wife. And then we have the Justice League International, which weren't so much a sponsored team, but a team nevertheless organized by Maxwell Lord, with also echoes and inspirations used from the Terrifics, among other things. Now, here's the thing, like, what does this show us about the Superman plot? Like, how is this relevant? Well, it is actually pretty damn relevant to what is going on in the world and how this, reflects onto characters like Superman and the impact that he will probably have by the ending events of the film on that of the superhero world that has been, fairly controlled in different ways to what we're used to seeing in other iterations. So the point I'm trying to get to here is that since heroes have existed for a long time in the DCU, the way heroes are seen and even present themselves, granted that it's not necessarily every single one of them, like Batman's out there doing his own thing, Superman evidently not wearing a corporate uniform, he's in his own Superman suit, but the main thing is that they present themselves in present day in a way that has been a bit more regulated. And as we see here, some heroes are allowing themselves to operate within that of a corporate company, somewhat losing their own sense of what you could say is like heroic individuality. Something that has been lost in time, perhaps in general, in the DCU compared to some of the heroes of old, or a better example, Superman himself. So Superman stands out in this world in the DCU's present day, a hero who isn't being controlled, so to speak, one of whom isn't corporately sponsored, one who isn't wearing a company's superhero uniform. Let's just say that one part of the Superman plot of which we have been clued into here, which perhaps could even relate to the former title of this movie, which was Superman Legacy, will perhaps surround Superman himself, inspiring the current generation of heroes to regain their own sense of superhero autonomy, if you will, igniting a new legacy of his own that will kind of inspire heroes across the board. Now, this is kind of done in a similar, and I stress similar way to that of the Kingdom Come comic book storyline, in where a much older Superman came out of retirement to rally a world that was overrun by heroes who have mostly lost the moral compass established by their predecessors. Now, obviously, we don't have an older Superman here, hence why it's an influence, but again, I think a similar effect will be felt by the influence that Superman has in this movie. Now, we do also have other characters that are, for lack of a better word, regulated in a roundabout way, such as the Engineer, of whom is a part of the DC Comics team, the Authority, of which is actually getting its own movie in the DCU. Now, it may very well be the case that in the present-day DCU, the Authority team, as in, like, the movie we're gonna get, may not be up and running and fully fledged with all of its members in that of the Authority already being banded together. And so until that happens, perhaps even after the events of the movie, we've seen from filming that the Engineer is pursuing Superman, even though she isn't an outright villain in the comics. She could perhaps be seen in this movie as a bit of a secondary antagonist, all while not, again, being a villain. Now, it's likely that the Engineer isn't so much of a representative of a corporately funded or sponsored superhero team, but she might be working for the government. This is like another way you can look at things. You have corporately sponsored teams with Guy Gardner, Hawkgirl, and whatnot, but you could also have similar things within that of the government. I mean, look at Amanda Waller's new Black Ops group, the Creature Commandos, of which Rick Flag Sr. is in, and we know that Rick Flag Sr. is reprising his role in the Superman movie in addition to Peacemaker Season 2. So you see what I mean? Like, there's a lot of enlisted heroes in various different ways in this present day world. Although I do want to say it is possible that she is working for Luthor, or Luthor creates a team to go after Superman, so she could still be a Luthor Corp somewhat regulated hero in a way. Regardless, it's another example of superpowered individuals offering up their services in a way that is executed on behalf of another interest, whether that's, corporate, military, or government. You get the picture, rather than that of their own sensibilities. Now, potential spoilers ahead, even though the man himself, James Gunn, has said over on Threads that he would never shoot a major spoiler in the middle of a big big city. So the man himself is saying that, you know, whatever we've seen out there aren't major spoilers that affect the plot of this film or ruin it, so just bear that in mind with what I'm about to speak about next, but you can feel free to skip to the next timestamp if you want to, but you know, at this point, I actually don't feel like you need to, but that's just me, so take my guidance or not, it's up to you. But we did see this black-suited figure of whom we don't have any confirmations on who that is as of right now, other than that they're working with the engineer as what I view as secondary antagonists in the movie. Even though they aren't, in my opinion, somewhat, like I'm kind of going to and fro with this, villains in the film. As we know, again, the engineer isn't a villain in the comics. It's more likely, in my opinion here, that they believe they are doing the right thing, when in reality, they're perhaps being used as muscle with whatever Lex Luthor has organized in his attempts to bring Superman down. Now back to the black-suited figure, this character has been speculated by fans to be a loose adaptation of Ulysses or Ultraman, but there has been another suggestion which I wasn't really looking so much into to begin with, and I often disregarded, which was the suggestion of another Authority member known as Midnighter. But now, believe it or not, I wouldn't want to rule him out, just like how I'm not ruling out the other suggestions as well. So granted that this character has a very big kind of silver U on his chest, and that's what led to a lot of people to believe it's an adaptation of the blatant U on Ultraman's suit chest, if you will, while changing up the look in various ways, because clearly this doesn't look like Ultraman in practically every other way. Of course, it could be seen as the U on Ulysses' suit, and how he has a black suit as well, but many of you have pointed out to me, most recently from the user Into the Zombie Apocalypse, that it could be Midnighter from the Authority. So again, I still wasn't sure about this, as it's not the traditional Midnighter look from the Authority, right? That's what I kept saying to people. Why would they, how could this be Midnighter if, you know, the traditional Midnighter costume is something I would view as fairly easy for them to pull off in live action. But when you do look at the Midnighter design from the comics Superman and the Authority, this is where things get fairly interesting. So here, you can see how Midnighter has a black suit, actually even some similar armor padding on his like biceps and shoulder area, and all while he doesn't, and I fully admit this, he doesn't have the silver U on his chest as seen in the black-suited figure on the Superman set. He still actually does have a U on his chest as outlined somewhat by the pattern of the suit. So you could argue this is their way of, you know, adapting and innovating on the design a little bit. So he still does have a U there, right? On this black suit that doesn't look like the traditional Midnighter suit. Also, on the Superman set version of this character, in the middle of the silver U, he has a little circle. So it is being speculated that they actually could have implemented Midnighter's crescent moon detail that he has on his more traditional Midnighter suit in more of a somewhat morphing of both traditional design in addition to that of the design seen in the Superman and Authority comic book. So you see where I'm going with this. As I always say, adaptations aren't copy and paste. So if they were to do Midnighter, hey, let's do his design mostly from Superman and the Authority. Let's give him a bit of a highlighted U, which I agree does more look like Ultraman, but let's give him the crescent moon circle within that U from the traditional look. That is something that a lot of live action things do when they kind of mix and match a bunch of things. Now, of course, I do recognize that there are differences. You know, there's no goggles on Midnighter usually, and this whole live action black suited figure has his whole face covered. Why? Like, if it is Midnighter, why not actually just show his chin, even if it's the Superman and the Authority comic book influenced version? But it is still interesting to me to consider if this figure seen on the set of Superman could just be their adaptation and iteration of an early Midnighter pre-Authority. Again, you know, chucking in the idea that the Authority team might not be fully established at this point, as their movie isn't happening like any time soon. And another very important thing to recognize here, who is he working alongside? None other than the engineer, another Authority member, with perhaps them both going on to form the Authority team after the events of this film, in where in their own movie, just like with a lot of superhero films, they could have a bit of a costume upgrade. But ultimately, we're just gonna have to wait and see. But this is why I'm making this video, just going over these main points and looking at what we have to work with here. But one thing that we do know for sure, ladies and gentlemen, is that Lex Luthor, as said by James Gunn himself, is the main primary villain for the Superman movie, and he does indeed have a plan to take Superman down. And I'm really looking forward to this iteration of Lex Luthor in Gunn's DCU, as it's been rumored that he's, much more of a science backgrounded Lex, of which was even teased by James Gunn with the emojis that he put on his Instagram post when welcoming Nicholas Hoult on board. Now, these emojis, sure, they're just emojis, but the more you looked into it and the more the rumors popped up, there's like a DNA sequence there's like a flask, there's a microscope. This definitely signifies scientific, but also feeds into the rumors of, oh, could he be using Kryptonian DNA to create a clone and this, that, and the other? Maybe, maybe not. We're gonna have to wait and see. I definitely think that Kryptonian DNA will be used some way or another. But there's one thing that we know about Lex Luthor above anything else, and that is that he loves being in control. And with the status quo in the DCU, with there being quite a bit of control now with regards to where superheroes are at, given that they've been around a long time, again, corporately funded and somewhat controlled superhero teams, government-controlled ones. You can imagine Lex Luthor looking at Superman and just seeing that he can't control him as something that really irks him. Now, I'm not saying that's like the sole reason he wants to go after Superman, but I'm just saying that feeds into this whole thing, I'm sure. But as for now, like, whether it's like him using Kryptonian DNA to enhance something else or someone else or whatever, we don't know much about Lex. Like, there's only one photo of him on set, and he wasn't in costume. He was being surrounded and escorted by umbrellas and things like that. Umbrellas escorting Lex. You get what I'm saying, but he's been very locked down, and I'm sure most of his scenes have been shot behind closed doors, even if there's like blue screens or green screens in the background to make it look like he's outside in like a larger area. He's been kept under lock and key with regards to his scenes. Now, another fascinating thing about this movie that I wouldn't say people have forgotten about, but it could be a big thing that isn't really being talked about so much anymore, is that we know little to nothing about what was actually teased in the official reveal of the Superman suit. And it's the big purple-looking ball with a beam coming out of it above Metropolis, leading to all kinds of speculation at the time. I mean, some people have said, oh, is this Solaris from All-Star Superman, since All-Star Superman is an influence on this movie? Is it this? Is it that? Is it something else? But another theory that's been floating around that I've teased before with people, telling me about it in DMs, and I was like, okay, let me read this because this could be something here. And I don't see a lot of people talking about it, but it could actually be taking inspiration from an issue of the Justice League International comics. So, stay with me here, but in Justice League International #7, many decades ago now, there's a big satellite, as you can see on screen, that sends out none other than a purple-ish looking beam to Earth. And the Justice League International go, obviously, to investigate this and save the day. And it turns out, though, and this is interesting, that the beam doesn't actually hurt you if you're in it. And it's revealed by Mr. Miracle that after a while, he realized that he had seen it before. He recognized it from that of New Genesis, and that it's one of Metron's satellites. Now, he details that the satellite was a training device used for their warriors, and it would throw all manner of threats at you, and you had to work your tail off to avoid them, but if you screwed up, the device would never hurt you. It always found some means to protect you. And when you look at the design of this satellite, like, sure, I get it, it's golden yellow, but it does seem to me like two eerily similar in ways. In the suit reveal image, it seems like it's all powered up, as the beam comes out of it, and it's got these like lines on the side that you can imagine. I wonder what that would look like if it wasn't like powered up. What would those details look like in terms of the lines on the big purple ball? So I know they don't exactly match the lines on the satellite from this Justice League International comic issue, But I just want to say that they're similar and there could be some inspiration there. And overall, while I don't think this will, literally be a satellite from New Genesis in the movie, I do think that this could very well be the inspiration behind what's going on with this object's involvement in the film. Now, another cool note I just want to add in here, it may mean something, it really may not mean anything, but the filming title, or like the working title that they're using on the slate for Superman, just like how the Penguin in filming used the code BOSS for its production, well, for Superman, it's Genesis. But either way, it turns out in the comic issue that the satellite was designed to initiate this death ray, right? Just to convince the UN to agree to a proposal for international status for the Justice League. So kind of to force their hand. It was orchestrated to make the Justice League International look good, get the UN to agree to it. So, very interesting stuff there. And it makes me wonder if this satellite-looking thing in the suit reveal picture could also be used for a similar purpose. Maybe perhaps it was designed to make it look like something very diabolically bad is happening in Metropolis. Now, whether that would be a plan to do with Maxwell Lord's efforts or something Luthor has set up remains to be seen, but I don't think it will be necessarily anything alien in the Superman movie. But either way, I'm not so sure about this one myself, so I leave the floor open to you guys to comment any theories as to what you think this satellite-looking thing could be. Now, up next, I want to issue a bit of a spoiler warning. Again, even though Gunn said, and this was shot out in the middle of the city, that there wouldn't be a big spoiler filmed out there, so he views this as no spoilers, apparently, but it's to do with something that happens to Superman that I want to briefly talk about with, obviously, something we know. So 3, 2, 1, and that is that Superman gets arrested. So this comes into play, as we know, with the whole engineer and, black-suited figure. Also, Rick Flag Sr. being involved in these scenes, as you're seeing on screen. Of course, Waller could also be involved, given the Black Ops government-level involvement with things like this, due to whatever Luthor has set up. Most likely Luthor, since, well, we know he's the main villain, so he's probably done something to frame Superman in order for him to get arrested in this scene, and that would, as a result, force the hand of the government and thus Waller to maybe send Rick Flag Sr. out from that of the back of Creature Commandos into the Superman movie. And then again, yes, you compare this with that of the engineer who thinks they're doing the right thing, the black suited figure who could possibly maybe now even be Midnighter if we're onto something there. Now, of course, I can't tell you why Superman gets arrested other than chucking in the theory that clearly it probably, well, not clearly, but it may have something to do with Luthor's involvement to defame Superman. But I do have theories about how he could get out of this, because since we know that an integral part of this film is the journalistic side with that of Lois Lane, the Daily Planet. We've got a bunch of Daily Planet crew as seen in the set photos of Superman, from Perry White, Jimmy Olsen, to Steve Lombard, to Cat Grunt, you name it, right? So I think maybe while everything is cooking on the superhero side with Superman, Lex Luthor, his metahuman compatriots with Mr. Terrific, who also seem to be defending Superman in these scenes, well, it could be integral that whatever journalistic investigation that Lois Lane is helming alongside Clark Kent, that she maybe is the key to getting some evidence to clear his name with how he hasn't got anything to do with what the government thinks that he's done. And that could be a nice way of like linking in those two sides of the film together, you know, the Daily Planet side, the Superman side. Now, up next, we do have some strong indicators about the inclusion of Krypto the Superdog in this movie, with even a video of Mr. Terrific going to a pet store that got broken into. So it's like Krypto jumped into the front of the store window and is like, you know, taking all the snacks in the pet store. And we see that Mr. Terrific is being seen on the street throwing out dog treats and even jumping up and down, pointing his finger to the sky while he's doing it, as if, you know, like fly up, you know, come on, go Krypto, go, something like that. Now, with this, I obviously don't know too much about what Krypto's involvement could be in the film. other than I think he's blatantly in it at this point. But I do wonder if James Gunn will make an origin for Krypto in this movie, rather than having Clark already have Krypto back on Krypton, and then, Jor-El sending him to Earth as like a bit of a test, and really he goes off course but arrives a little bit later by the time that Clark is, like a teenager, and he's had him ever since he was like a boy, right? I don't think it's going to be something like that. I could be wrong, but in my theory here is that if Lex has been using Kryptonian DNA in this movie to create something that could possibly rival Superman, or whatever you want to theorize about with regards to what he could whip up here, that perhaps if you do go down that line of thinking, that maybe Lex would go through the phases of experimentation that you do in science, if you will. Not that I'm a scientist, but let's not pretend that in experiments like this, usually animal test subjects are used before, you go to human trials. And one of those being a dog, maybe, who goes on to have the name Krypto. And perhaps through the journey of this film, Superman and the LordTech team discover him, and he's taken under Superman's wing from here on out in the movie. Now, this actually, believe it or not, wouldn't really be too dissimilar to what they did with the DC Universe's Titans series and the introduction of Superboy in Season 2, with how Cadmus Labs were experimenting with the Kryptonian DNA on Krypto while trying to create a perfect Superman and Lex Luthor clone. And when Superboy escaped, he noticed Krypto in a cage and he let him out, and then they were like the best of buds from there on out. So you see where I'm going with this. I think that would be pretty cool to do, to have, Krypto be a bit of a byproduct of what Lex is doing, and then, Clark gets basically a Kryptonian dog as a result from here on out. Now, up next, we know that the final days of filming were actually spent at Union Terminal in Cincinnati. Now, this is a very intriguing location to film because it was indeed the inspiration behind the Hall of Justice itself in the comic books. So the fact that they filmed at the real Hall of Justice, probably is set up for how in the first live-action DCU movie, we have Superman present there with Guy Gardner, Hawkgirl, and Mr. Terrific, that this could be the literal Hall of Justice in the DCU. Now, of course, there's all kinds of theories that ripple out from this. Because this is a DCU that's had heroes exist for a long time, one could argue that the Hall of Justice is already literally a Hall of Justice set up for the Justice League already. But you could argue that this is also a precursor into the Justice League being formed in the DCU. As in, they haven't actually had a fully fledged Justice League mirroring that of the comics up until this point in the DCU itself. Now, I know lots of people think that the Justice League have already been a thing, but I'm not so sure about that. It's a bit difficult because with what I've gone over with regards to the plot, the way superheroes operate in this world, sure, not everyone is a part of a corporate-sponsored team or working on behalf of the government, but that is mostly, from the clues we've been given, the way things are working. So if the Justice League was already set up, I don't imagine that. I know lots of people are pointing out how the LordTech logo has like a J and a L, or like there's like a mirrored letter that shows a J and a L for like Justice League. But I think it's important to remember that this logo quite literally is the logo for LordTech. So I don't know if LordTech would have a logo that is also meant to be the logo for the Justice League. Now, also another theory with that is that I don't think the Justice League would have some members in it. Like, we're talking the Justice League with Batman, Superman, and everything like that. If it already existed, would you really have members like Guy Gardner or Hawkgirl? Let's just go with Hawkgirl, who's wearing a corporate-sponsored uniform while also being in the Justice League itself. So this is what I mean. I don't think the Justice League, at the end of the day, as we know it, as what we're most familiar with everyone being their own unique individual heroes and identity, is set up in the DCU. Now, you could argue there's like a precursor to the Justice League going on with that of, what's going on with this LordTech-sponsored superhero team with Mr. Terrific, Guy Gardner, and Hawkgirl and whatnot. But I don't imagine Batman being in this Justice League when you have a couple couple of other members perhaps in it who are wearing corporate sponsored. Do you know what I mean? Like, it just doesn't, as much as I keep seeing these other arguments that I understand from other people, it's still, no matter what, with each theory, doesn't link up in the way we know it. So no matter what, if I try and combine all of the theories together, I think the best conclusion that I can come up with is that there may be a form of League in some way, shape, or form in the ways we've discussed, but it's not the League as we know it. And by the ending events of this movie, with Superman Legacy doing his thing, leaving a legacy, they find their own sense of unique individuality, their own superhero autonomy, and they establish something new, and that is, the actual Justice League as we know it. And that's why they're filming at the Hall of Justice. Not that I'm saying they're filming like a scene in where it's like, hey, we're setting up the Justice League. It may already be a base of operations for various superheroes, even if they're a part of different sects of teams and government teams and corporate sponsored teams. Maybe it's still a place that other heroes liaise, but it's still not the identity of what we know the Justice League to be and the status quo within that Hall of Justice building. But soon, I'm sure it will be familiar and respective of the Hall of Justice we know, thanks to the effect that Superman has. So that's my best way of saying that without shooting down everyone's theories. I think we're all having similar ideas that are floating in the right direction. So if you have any ideas, or you agree or disagree or want to add on to anything I said, let me know, again, down in the comments below. And with that being said, I'm going to end the video there. Now, there probably are some other things that I could have got into, but I think those are like the main things, the key things that, I wanted to talk about. Cover for newcomers, but also those who have been along for the journey of the Superman filming, while also offering in new ideas and, new theories now that we're heading into post-production. But other than that, ladies and gentlemen, if you've made it this far, I would greatly appreciate a like on this video. It really does help out with like the algorithm and things like that. Consider subscribing for more videos like this. But until next time, I'm gonna love you and leave you. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you fellow Kryptonians in the next video. Goodbye.